Perhaps some of you may have heard or viewed Chimamanda Adichie's brilliant TED Talk a few years ago. I'm going to put the link in the chat box for those of you who haven't, but please do view it after the service, not right this very second. She talks about her experience growing up middle class in Nigeria, learning English in school and reading books about blonde hair, blue-eyed characters frolicking in the snow and drinking ginger beer all day long. While it's nice to fantasize about a culture that is completely foreign to one's own, it also limits the imagination that someone like Chimamanda could have ever existed in in these stories that she read about, or even had a place in this world. Conversely, Western authors at the time probably had a very limited view of Africa as well, which, by the way, consists of 54 countries and over 3,000 tribes. These perspectives tend to skew towards the caricature of a victim who is hungry, malnourished, or engaged in a civil war. Don't get me wrong, stereotypes come from somewhere, but we have to be careful when we put everyone into one tiny little box and try to fit everyone into a single story. According to Chimamanda, not one person represents everyone. Take the notion of an American, for example, which may be a trigger for many Canadians these days with all this talk about tariffs and annexation by the current president. Now, some of you may not know this, but I did not become an American citizen until the year 2000. And even after then, debated whether I should accept the hyphenated category of being called an Asian American. The truth of the matter is, I never felt like I completely fit in wherever I grew up, such as the Philippines, and I certainly never lived in China, so I wouldn't even begin to imagine what it would be like to have grown up there or have a sense of belonging, even if I lived in China. Being a third culture individual isn't easy because I never felt like I belonged anywhere or fit any single category. My parents, who were Chinese, were the ones who decided to immigrate to the US, and thankfully they settled in California, where there were so many others who looked like me. It wasn't until I moved out of that deep blue bubble to crimson red Florida that I realized how sheltered I was all along. The United States does not have a single story, a single set of values, and definitely not a single vision for its future. Can we be humble enough to admit that, like Chimamanda did when she said she too missed another story altogether, when the only story she, for example, heard about her houseboy Fide was that he was a poor person? That is until one day when she had a chance to visit Fide's family in the outskirts of Nigeria and found out that they were basket weavers and found out how generous the townspeople were. He certainly wasn't poor when it comes to the talents and gifts that he had to offer. Or the story that Angela shared with us during the Time for All Ages about this unhoused woman. What if that wasn't her only story? What if she was a queen? What if she was a savior who warned people about the fire at just the right moment? What stories are we already beginning to tell about Oakwood Vaughan, the neighborhood we're about to move into this spring? Do we still call it Little Jamaica, even though the latest census clearly shows that it's way more diverse than that now? But even if that neighborhood were just full of Jamaicans, What's the story we tell ourselves about Jamaicans overall? Are they all homophobes, fundamentalist Christians, Bob Marley fans? Well, that last part might be 100% accurate, actually. But even then, we won't really know, right? Again, it's not that these stereotypes aren't true, they're just incomplete. Another notion Chimamanda brought us is that stories we tell ourselves usually start with secondly. In this case, we begin the story about Oakwood Bond after the pandemic, with the disruption caused by the building of the Eglinton Crosstown, causing many businesses to shut down, worsening the economic condition of that neighborhood. That's the secondly part of the story. But what's the firstly aspect of it? How many chapters do we go back, and how far back do we go at the story to get to the root of what that neighborhood is really all about? The only way to ever approach any story is with a sense of humility and genuine curiosity, not from a place of certainty, and certainly not from a place of paternalistic aid. The questions we may be asking are, whose story is it? Who gets to tell these stories? And how are these stories told? Ruth mentioned in the chat box earlier about those who are fighting against tyranny. And so by now, many of you are familiar probably with the story of Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy from the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, D.C., who had the distinct honor of preaching at the Interfaith Prayer event during the inauguration earlier this week. Again, I would highly encourage you to listen to the last 2 minutes of her sermon. It's basically a twist of Genesis 19, which some of you may be familiar with. It's commonly known as the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes, quite a juicy tale, isn't it? For today's sake, I'm going to call it A City with Two Tales, a twist on Charles Dickens's book, as many of you may have picked up on. Over the years, fundamentalists have co-opted this story as a condemnation of homosexuality. But let me tell you the tale of this story from a different light, perhaps. It's a tale about two angels who went to visit this town called Sodom. So they were strangers in this town, and all they were trying to do was to find food and shelter. And there's this guy named Lot who was kind enough to take them in and to show them mercy. That evening, the rest of the town were so self-absorbed and so greedy with their social media enterprises and electric car and space rocket manufacturing that they didn't want to bother with these poor nobodies. So they came into Lot's house and they knocked on the door, practically broke it down. And it says in Genesis 19 that every single man from that town wanted to come in and gang rape these two individuals. Now, I don't know about you, but I have yet been to a city where the inhabitants are 100% gay. Now, that would be my version of heaven, mind you, but it goes to show that that's not really what they were trying to do. This was not a consensual kind of relationship. And as we know, rape is more about an act of violence because Lot, having just won the Father of the Year award, offered up his two daughters to this mob instead. Now, again, the question you may be asking, and the question I was asking myself is, what would a bunch of gay men want to do with Lot's daughters other than giving them a makeover? The point is, the whole town was burned to the ground except for Lot's family, because the whole town of Sodom and Gomorrah did not show kindness and mercy to strangers. And these strangers actually, again, happened to be angels. And instead, the whole town was too preoccupied, I should say, with being too greedy and cruel. Sound familiar? I mean, couldn't one say that the Western world and industrialized countries and countries that have more money than what they do with could be seen as the modern day Sodom and Gomorrah? Now, Bishop Buddy was merely pointing out that those immigrants and 2S LGBT plus folks are those angels. They're the strangers who are fearful and wanting to seek refuge. All she's asking is for all of us to show a little bit of empathy, because we too were strangers in a strange land at one point or another. Again, one passage, two different stories that one could interpret from. There's the homophobic version of Genesis 19, and there's the version that the original writers probably intended to convey to the readers, a message of being kind to one another. Ooh, how radical, how political. How dare we talk about being kind to one another, right? And this is a double disruption, because the message that the secular world got to hear as well was that not all Christians are the homophobic MAGA types. Because if we only hold on to that story, we tread into dangerous territory as well. And that too is the danger of a single story. Folks, the sooner we develop a deeper sense of curiosity about each other's stories, the sooner we journey humbly with the divine and with one another, the sooner we'll be able to reach heaven or nirvana. According to Chimamanda, when we reject the single story, when we realize there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. So why not begin to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts as well, to a different story waiting to emerge, one that calls us to build heaven here on earth. Let us take a moment and take a deep breath with one another, and be still and listen to perhaps another story waiting to be told.